the clock is ticking and the administration is exploring all of its options. Let's bring in our White House correspondent, Dan Lothian. Dan, good evening.
Good evening. Well, you know, that August 2nd deadline is quickly approaching, and the White House continues to warn about the dire consequences if the debt ceiling is not raised. One option now being floated involves the 14th Amendment.
At a Q&A session in May hosted by Politico, Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner whipped out a copy of the 14th Amendment to warn lawmakers against threatening a default in debt ceiling talks.
The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for the payments of pension and bounties for services in suppressing insurrection or rebellion, this is the important thing, shall not be questioned.
Now, some Democrats seem to be taking a closer look at those four words Geithner emphasized in Section 4.
Shall not be questioned.
As a possible solution in breaking the debt ceiling impasse. The thinking that President Obama may be able to ignore the ceiling because it is unconstitutional. But Steve Vladek, a constitutional law professor at American University, says it's not so black and white.
I think we're not really talking about the clear legal argument so much as we are talking about what's possible. I think there's at least some textual support for that argument in Section 4, but this is a provision that, even though it's been around for 135 years, it's barely been interpreted. It's never really been the subject of Supreme Court decisions, and so I think all we have is speculation and guesses.
Despite intense talks led by Vice President Biden and more than $1 trillion in budget cuts identified, Republicans and Democrats remain at sharp odds over deeper spending cuts and tax hikes for the wealthy. With the clock ticking, a long-term solution becomes more difficult. So back to Section 4 of the 14th Amendment. While legal scholars debate it and some Democrats entertain it, Republican Senator John Cornyn dismissed it on Fox News Sunday.
That's crazy talk. It's not acceptable for Congress and the president not to do their job and to say somehow the president has the authority to then basically do this by himself. We ought to sit down and work together.
Now, Senator Cornyn suggested that Republicans might be willing to embrace a mini debt ceiling deal. This is something we heard from former President Bill Clinton over the weekend, extending for perhaps 6 months, even 8 months, but also Cornyn warning that this would only delay the, quote, moment of truth. Joe?
So, Dan, just to be clear here, has the administration sent any signals at all that it might tangibly use this weapon, or is it just a trial balloon in your view?
This is just something that has been floated about mainly by Democrats. The White House has not specifically said that this is a tool that they would employ if it comes down to that. They really hope that Republicans and Democrats can hammer this out by that August 2nd deadline. That is what they're pushing for right now, Joe.
Dan Lothian at the White House, thanks so much for that, Dan.
Okay.